So yesterday I watched a video that I found fascinating. It's very interesting. It was produced, I think, by CBS because I hear Dan Rather's voice in in it, and so it's a video about this guy who is a historian, and it's old. And he when he graduated from college, he was interviewing. He'd go around interviewing former slaves, and he caught some very interesting conversations and quotes from people who were former slaves. One in particular that I'll play for you in a few moments was this guy who was a former slave, and he had a better grasp of where his rights came from and how important they were than I'd say most civic professors on any Ivy League college campus does today. And I have a theory as to why that's the case. Let's talk about it. Hello, everyone. This is Keith. Welcome to the Ghetto Sapien channel, your home of inner city intelligence. So, this interview that I'm about to play for you, again, fascinating interview. I love watching and learning more about history, and who better to hear it from than the people who live through it. So, listen to this guy. He's going to talk about, you don't hear the former slave in the video, but this guy who interviewed him, you're going to hear a little conversation he had that I thought was just enlightening.
But John Henry Falk may have experienced the most profound effect. He was a graduate student when he interviewed the former slaves, including the two women you hear in this broadcast. Himself interviewed just before he died in 1979, Falk was going on about how he believed in giving blacks the right to go to school, giving them the right to vote, giving them the right to go into anything they qualified for. And then he said he experienced an epiphany.
I was sitting out on a wagon tongue with this old black man, and was telling him what a different kind of white man I was. I remember him looking at me very sadly and kind of sweetly and condescending and said, "You know, you still got the disease, honey. I know you think you're cured, but you're not cured. You can't give me the right to be a human being. I'm born with that right. Now, you can keep me from having that. If you've got all the policemen and all the jobs on your side, you can deprive me of it. But you can't give it to me. Because I was born with it just like you was." My God, it had a profound effect on me. I was furious with him. But the more I reflected on it, the more profoundly it affected me. And I realized this was where it really was.
Yep, that's where it really was. So, you see what the guy realized. I'm talking about the white guy who came with the paternal instinct that he's going to grant all these wonderful things. And I guess the black guy was going to be very grateful to him that he allowed him to have access to his own rights that he's born with. But the former slave, again, I don't think he had formal education. He's probably illiterate. I hope I'm not insulting the guy. He's long gone. But my assumption is that he probably didn't have formal education, or probably had not learned how to read even at that point, because it wasn't uncommon back then. But he still had the wisdom to know that this guy who's presenting himself as his benefactor was diseased, and which I thought was interesting a way to put it, that he had a disease. I think he was being polite, the disease of bigotry and racism. I'd say it's more racism than bigotry. I distinguish the two. I make a distinction between the two, because bigotry is racial hatred. It's when you hate the other person because of some racial trait that they have. And the guy, I don't think he hated the other guy, even though he's a little angry at the former slave. But I think there was some racism going on, because racism does not require hatred. It's just that you feel that you're genetically superior to someone else, and that you should have the power over their lives. It does not take hatred at all. You can love someone or at least on some level, and still be a racist towards them, because it's like you love your dog, you pet your dog, you feed your dog, you make sure your dog is safe and healthy, but you're not going to ask your dog for advice. You're not going to let your dog marry your daughter or anything like that because it's a dog. Well, that's how leftists and the people who think that they own black people or any particular race, when they take them for granted, it's on that level. Because it's like, we're good to you, we're nice to you, we're giving you things, you should be grateful. That was the dynamic going on between this guy, the historian, and his subject, the former slave. And the former slave just gave him a wake-up call. Tell him, no, your rights don't. You don't own my rights. I do. I'm born with them. Which I thought was interesting was the fact that he pointed out that if you have the power of the police and the power to withhold jobs from me, it sounds kind of eerily familiar, you can block me, you can curtail me from having access to my rights, but I still have my rights. They're still there. You can take them, but you can't give them to me, which I thought was brilliant analysis. Because back then, let's not forget, most of the slave owners were white rich Democrats at the time, which also it's kind of eerie about what's going on today. And I know some people like to say, well, why do I have to point out the fact that they're Democrats? It's not like it was random who were in favor of slaves back then, that it was just random white people. It was mostly Democrats. And let's not fool ourselves. It's not like there's certain behaviors and certain cultural norms that follow political lines. It happens to this day. I bet you could look at someone and tell who they voted for without them saying one word. If they're wearing a mask and they were driving a car all by themselves, I'm pretty sure I know who they voted for. So there are certain behaviors that identify people's political ideology, at least to me. So people wear the mask in a car by themselves, Democrats. People who own slaves in the 1800s, Democrats. Get over it. That's just how it is. So anyway, I think this guy, I know it's a little mean, but I had to keep it real. So the reason why I think this guy, who again not educated, probably illiterate, why he believes that his rights are inherent to him, they're inalienable, was because I think his one access to books was the Bible. He may not have known how to read it, but he probably memorized chapters and verses from it, and came with understanding that there is the spark of divinity in every human being. Doesn't matter if you're king or queen or pauper or thief or merchant. The Bible speaks that we're all God's children and we're all equal in His sight. So that gives you the idea that human life is valuable, all human life, that no one's better than the other. So I think personally that's where this guy got the idea from, that no one's going to grant him his rights. He has them already. So that's what was really striking about that particular interview. I think the other thing is the brilliance of this man, who, again, not formally educated and lived most of his life as a slave, goes back to my theory that this country wasn't built on slavery. This country didn't rise to greatness because of slavery. Because if that were the case, if the amount of slaves tracked the greatness of the country, then the West Indies, South America, many of the Arab countries would be far better off, far richer, far more powerful than the United States, because more slaves went to those countries. Even the Caribbean, small little Caribbean, had more slaves than the United States sent to them. They just died off faster because of the horrible conditions there. So I think, if anything, again, how smart this guy was and how much common sense wisdom he had, he should have been running a business, and the whole country would have been better off if he had, rather than using him and wasting our most precious resource, human potential, and human mind, instead of wasting them by using them as mules or horses or oxen out in the field. That is a waste of resources, much more horrible and more detrimental to the country than wasting fresh air and clean water, wasting human potentials far worse, and I think also evil. So I'll give you another example why of how we were wasting, this country is wasting its brain trust in the fields in the South, Democrat owned, by just going over. Let's look at when the golden era of black business was, and you'd be surprised. So, according to many historians, the golden age of black businesses was the 1900 to 1930, an era of true entrepreneurship and black excellence. I'm just reading this real quick, just read the first paragraph. So, Dr. Juliet E.K. Walker, a business historian who wrote the history of black businesses in America, capitalism, that horrible word that a lot of leftists hate, race, entrepreneurship in 2009, written in 2009. She called the period between 1900 and 1930 the golden age of black business. Why? Because businesses owned by African Americans were growing faster than ever at that time. So that means, like these gentlemen, and I think there's a lady there too, 1900 to 1930, more than likely some of these guys, either their parents or their grandparents or they themselves worked in the fields before they were able to own their own business and contribute to the economy of this country. So that means, had we continued slavery, all of these brilliant people, and there's many, many more. You had in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you had Black Wall Street and things like that. These people would not have been around to contribute economically to this country, to the wealth of this country. You would not have had the advances we had in sciences and healthcare, blood transfusion, George Washington Carver, things like that. We wouldn't have had the benefits and advances unless we got rid of slavery. These people would have been wasted in the field picking cotton somewhere, and that would have been horrible for the country as well as for them. So that is why I stand by my statement, but that this country was not built on slavery. If anything, slavery kept it from advancing after a certain point. Part of the reason why the South lost to the North was the North was more technologically and industrial. It was already in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, while the South was still relatively poor and uneducated, because you get lazy if you could just point and have someone do something, rather than you have to learn to develop engineering and create a machine or factory that could do something where you could have fewer men working and with greater output. So that's my theory. I think I ended there. So if you have any comments, please comment, like, share, and subscribe.